Welcome back to Truth to Tell Community Connections. I'm Michelle Alimoradi.
And I'm Tom O'Connell. Welcome to the 10th in our series of Truth to Tell Community Connections, held across the state of Minnesota on location, thanks to generous funding from the Bush Foundation and production services powered by St. Paul Neighborhood Network and KFAI Radio.
We're here live from the Minneapolis Urban League to talk about rethinking parent involvement in K-12 education. As the debate over how to improve public education and close the achievement gap continues, one area that almost everyone agrees on is the importance of parent involvement in any sort of forward progress. But what exactly does parent involvement mean? And how open are schools to genuine partnerships with parents? How well do our schools engage with parents and students in low-income communities and communities of color? And what happens when the cultural values reflected in our public schools clash with the values and experiences of some of our students and their families?
This program will explore approaches that go beyond site councils and parent-teacher meetings, as important as they are, to deeper relationships between schools, parents, and communities. And to help us do that, we are drawing on the experience and knowledge of parents, educators, and community members who have experienced this issue from a variety of perspectives and approaches.
We have so many great people with us here tonight to speak on this topic, so we're going to divide our program into 3 parts. In part 1, we'll talk to our panelists about their projects and perspectives. In part 2, we'll call on some designated folks in the audience who themselves bring a wealth of insight and experience to this question of parent involvement in education. And in part 3, we'll open up the question to everyone in our audience tonight and close out with a free-for-all conversation where everyone can just pipe in with all their thoughts.
All right. So with that, let's briefly introduce our panelists and guests. First, with us on our panel tonight, we have Zuki Ellis and Rebecca Wade, who work as a team in the St. Paul Federation of Teachers Parent Home Visit Program. They will share with us how the program works and what insights they have gathered on that experience on the power of greater parent-teacher collaboration. Welcome, Zuki and Rebecca.
Next, we have with us Kristen Talbert, who is a participant in the Absent Narratives Project sponsored by the Minnesota Humanities Commission. She currently works at the Anda Young Center for Native Youth, and she is a state licensed teacher in American Indian culture and the Dakota language. And she advocates for greater undertaking of the American Indian experience, past and present, in our schools. Welcome to you, Kristen.
And we also have Tracine Asbury. Tracine is serving her first term on the Minneapolis School Board as a representative from District 2 in South Minneapolis. She's a former teacher in the Minneapolis Public Schools, mother of 3. In fact, I think all of our panelists are mothers of kids who have attended this public schools. In her PhD thesis in critical pedagogy from the University of St. Thomas, she conducted in-depth interviews with low-income African-American mothers to gain a deeper understanding of both the opportunities and obstacles for greater parent involvement. Glad to have you with us, Tracine.
And our final panelist tonight is Victoria Balco. Victoria is the former chair of the Education Committee for Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, an organization we've worked with in our last forum too, so we're glad to have somebody back from there. And that's a grassroots community organization that engages citizens or residents of the North Side on a range of educational issues and other issues as well, housing and the like. Victoria will speak about the power of parent organizing in supporting and at times challenging public schools to deliver on a liberating promise of public education. Victoria, welcome to Truth to Tell.
Thank you. Hello.
So first, I think we'll hear from the home visit program from St. Paul, Zuki and Rebecca. Tell us a little bit about what you learned from that program and what your perspective is on parent engagement.
The Parent-Teacher Home Visit Project came to St. Paul about 3 years ago. It's based on a project out of Sacramento, California. And what it does is has teachers going out into the communities and visiting our families in their homes. So often everything we do asks our families to come into our buildings. It's maybe not always convenient time-wise for them to get in, to come to meetings, to come to parent-teacher conferences. And so the perception is that if our families are not coming into the school, that they're not interested in their students' education, or that they're not involved parents, or they're not engaged. which we know is not the case. There's lots of obstacles and barriers that get in the way of allowing our families to come in. And so the Parent-Teacher Home Visit Project is a project that allows teachers in pairs to go out and visit our families in their homes, in their communities, and really just have a conversation about what is it that our families want for their students. One of the questions we ask is, what are your hopes and dreams for your child this year? We're not bringing any paper with. We don't want them to sign anything. We don't want to fill out all the emergency records. We just want to listen to what it is our families want. So it's really been a great experience to see the excitement from students who are our best advertisers. You know, once you visit one student's home, they come back and say, Miss Wade was at my house last night. And then the other kids are like, are you coming to my house too? So they really are excited about it. We had a great experience this year. We got national coverage on the Today Show that they were here and filmed a segment for the Today Show about the Parent-Teacher Home Visit Project. And so it's getting talked about a little bit nationwide. So it's kind of exciting.
Can we hear a little bit from your teammate here?
I'm a parent trainer for the project, and it's important to our team that we have a parent on the training team. And I think that is just as a perspective, not as from the teacher, but as a parent.
So when you say parent trainer, you mean you are a parent and you are training, not that you're training people to be a parent.
Right.
Yeah.
I am a parent training teachers to do home visits.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
You can see where that term would get
Yes, it
confusing
would.
to some people.
Yes.
And so as a team, do you both go into the home together, or is it sort of a handoff
We
situation?
actually have 9 trainers now in St. Paul. The project has grown enough that we can't always, initially we started with 5 and we weren't always all available to get to the trainings. We've also started to do some trainings outside of St. Paul in greater Minnesota, and Zuki and one of our other trainers were in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and so it's growing. We're the Midwest Training Center for the project, and so anybody in the Midwest region who wants trainings would call us and we would go and do the training. And so we actually have 9 trainers. We go in groups, typically 4 or 5 of us to a training, always with a parent, so that you can hear parent testimony about what does it mean to have a teacher come into your home and ask questions and really want to hear your answer about what you want for your kids. So that's how the trainings work. They're 4-hour trainings, and so a team goes in.
So how many home visits do you do in a year now?
We just actually, on the drive over, we just got an email about the update. So far, we just held another debrief, and we're at, so from the first few months of the school year, we're at 240 home visits. Nationally, we went over 20,000 last year across the country. So one of the things that the St. Paul Teacher Home Visit Project struggled with was the first year of our existence was the year that a number of schools had extended hours added to their day. So going an extra hour in school made it a little more difficult because teachers visit families after their workday is done. We don't get to go during the school day. We have to go, in the evenings or on weekends, and so it was a little more difficult that first year. So,
About how long do you think it'll be before you start to have enough data to see what kind of a difference this is making? I mean, has this been around long enough to really see results at this point?
Yes, and actually we're currently working with an evaluation team that will collect our data for us.
Okay, so you should know in the next year?
I would say in the next year and a half, yes. Yes, definitely.
So
and nationally, the project has been around 15 years.
Oh,
so
really?
there's actually a lot of data around, particularly in the Sacramento area where it started, around what they've seen, increased student achievement, lower suspension and dismissal rates, higher graduation rates. So it's a positive.
Do they divide that out by demographic? I mean, a lot of what we see here, we're talking about achievement gap. And so, I mean, I guess I'd be curious to see, is this affecting the groups where we're wanting it to see progress?
I don't know the answer to that. If they actually have, but if they've actually, aggregated out the data based on demographics. Sacramento, they started in the inner city, the urban parts of the schools in Sacramento. So those were the schools and the families that were visited. And so the increase there has been huge.
Yeah.
Their national website may or may not have some data that's broken down by race or by socioeconomic status.
So what's your biggest sort of takeaway and learning, in addition to how much the kids really love it? What's been the biggest surprise or the thing that moves you the most?
I would say during our debriefs, the teachers have 2 debriefs a year that they attend in the fall and the spring when they get together and talk about how the visits were. And as a parent, to sit in the room and listen to the teachers talk about the visits that they had they're very moving. That, they sat down and had dinner or coffee or just sat with, a student who showed them their rooms, and, they had great conversations, and that, sitting down with mom and dad or whoever the caregiver was or is, that they were pretty much on the same page. We want what's best for our child, and, we're going to work as a team to make sure that happens. And as a parent, to sit there and listen to multiple stories that is just, it's really overwhelming.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Krista, let's bring you into the conversation. Given your experience and your as a parent and as a Native American educator, what's your perspective on parent engagement?
My perspective on parent engagement is that parents should be involved. I feel like as being Dakota, it's hard for people to understand my culture, and that makes it difficult in the classroom. So I try and encourage teachers to ask questions, and I tell them that I'm a resource, and if you have, a Native American Studies unit, ask me. I'm there, and I really try to make myself available to the teacher.
Definitely. I mean, we've heard a lot about particularly people in the Native community being sort of hesitant to really dive into the system just because of past issues, like because of historical trauma, I guess is the term. I mean, is there a particular way that teachers that are not Native should perhaps try a different approach to engaging, students from a Native background?
From a Native background? Yeah, I think it's just good teaching to be able to do that. You should be able to reach every single one of your students. With my daughter, for example, she learns a little bit differently, and the teacher, emailed me, and we talked about it, and we had a meeting and a discussion, and she was able to get what she needed, and the teacher was able to get what they needed in order to grade her. She just did it a different way.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So you've been at this for a while. Have you seen much change? I mean, do you feel encouraged that there's a greater awareness of the importance of understanding Native history? This was the 100th anniversary of the Dakota conflict.
Yep, it was the 150th anniversary. And I think I've taught on light rail tours, they're called, and at first nobody knew about the history, especially of Fort Snelling. And as the years, I've done it for like 7 years, I think, and these last 2 years, a lot of students are like, oh, I learned about that in school, and I know about that, and it's really good to know that history is being taught, because it's a hard history to learn about and talk about, but we do.
Yeah. So, any other thoughts about how it's going, and is it with the work?
How it's going? I think it's going good.
Good.
I think there's a lot to be improved upon, but overall, we're heading in the right direction.
Good, great.
Awesome.
Thanks, and I'm sure there'll be more questions as we go along here. So Victoria, you're with a community organization that's done a lot of work in supporting and also sometimes challenging our public schools. What are some of your thoughts?
Thoughts on parent engagement would be that parents need to be involved in what's going on, and the reason that is because parents are an extension to their kids, and therefore it's a kind of a three-way triangle that the schools need to be involved. The goal is always for the child to be successful as possible, and the parent needs to be involved in that as well. And when you have a breakdown between the two, that causes all the issues, and part of the reason why there's such an opportunity gap that's going on right now is the fact that parents aren't involved so much. So with NOC, we're kind of a member-led organization. And we got together with people who are concerned as parents, community members, and teachers, and people getting together to discuss these issues and kind of address the parent engagement piece, and that became one of our biggest things, is how do we get parents engaged in different activities and get them involved in the schools. And one of the things that NOC did was in 2010 was get involved when North High was being closed. That NOC was part of that coalition because the district was deciding to close the school without getting any parent or community involvement in. And the community and parents stood up and said no. Yeah. And with true parent engagement, you have to be part of the whole process and decision-making, the design. You can't just be told what's going to happen after the fact. And that's what we've have found is that a lot of what parent engagement they say it is, it's not really, because we are told to you what's going to happen as opposed to being part of all the process. And that's something that NOC has been doing all along with our different works that we've done.
So you're interested in actually getting parents and communities involved in the actual decision-making and school policy and all that?
In the behavior standards, as well as in designing what the specific needs are for that school. Not just, there's not kind of like a blanket overall way to be able to handle each school, because each school is different, each needs are different. So the parents in the community and the students and the teachers all should be working together to figure out what's best for those students, what's best for that school.
Now, at NOC, you guys do a lot of canvassing in the North community neighborhoods, right? I'm just curious, like, as you go around and you talk to people in the community, does it seem like people are legitimately interested in being involved, but there's just a lot of barriers, or is this like a completely new idea to people when you're talking to them? I'm just kind of curious where you feel the community stands without somebody coming in and saying this is a good idea, you know, where the baseline is at. You know what I'm saying?
Well, the community, we have done a survey actually with the community, and we door knocked throughout North Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rondo, and East Side, and we have some volunteers over there who helped us do that. But the survey came out is that the parents want to be involved, and they feel they want to be part of what's going on. They want their students, their children to be successful. But what the barriers are is that people feel as if the school is not inviting and does not wish to listen to their ideas, their thoughts, or feel that they're valued.
So do they feel as though they need to be invited in order to get involved, or they're actually being ignored, or does your survey go that deep? I don't know.
It kind of goes that they're being invited to come into discussions after decisions are made, come into a family night for some fun, but no real talking to me about my kid along the way, positive things. If you're only calling, we got parents who are saying that the district calls them only when discipline issues are going on, as opposed to anything that's going on is positive. A lot of our, in the survey that we did, was that parents of color really wanted more of a involved communication, so like phone calls and text messages, and not the emails and not those kinds of other ways of communicating, and that those were part of the barriers that were happening as to why there was kind of the walls up that it's happening.
So it's an interesting cultural thing that you would want to discuss with the teachers at the school.
Yeah. So we'll come back. These are really great issues. I want to hear more about the North High situation. But let's get to Tracine. You have so many different roles. You're a parent, you were a teacher, right, in the public schools, and now you're on the school board. And also, along the way, you really took a deep look at parent involvement, talked to a lot of low-income African-American women about their perspective. So.
Right.
Thank you. It's so great. And it's kind of nice to go last to hear all of these perspectives. So thank you. I am a former Minneapolis public school teacher. I taught over north at W. Harry Davis for almost 10 years. And then I currently teach teachers in education programs in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And then I have 3 kids, 2 of which are in Minneapolis public schools. So I just want to clarify that I have those perspectives, but the thing that it makes it really intricate, but it makes it really exciting because, and challenging too, because usually people find it easier if I just speak from one voice. If I speak only as a parent, if I speak only a parent that lives over in Southwest Minneapolis in District 6 versus a former Minneapolis public school teacher where I taught at W. Harry Davis over north. So there are different perspectives, and I really believe that Minneapolis, specifically public school system, can be a place where all parents can be engaged at various levels based on their interest level, based on their availability. One of the things that I wanted to talk about that I can just kind of add to our conversation is that my specific research was on family involvement, and it was examining ideas and exploring alternatives for African American families. And I looked at how race, class, and gender intersect based on the disparities that we've designed, in society. So I looked at working class, so disparities based by socioeconomic status. I looked at mothers, so disparities based on gender, and then I looked at African American disparities based on the way race is constructed. So I looked at how when a parent has those 3 intersections, what is their reality? How would they redefine family involvement based on the stance that it's very 2-parent, very European, very heterosexual, very, middle class perspective. So what I did is I worked with these families, and I became their scribe. It's amazing. I found it amazing what people can talk about, how they can dissect things, how they can explore, critically think about things when they're given the time and the space. Fortunately, I had a Bush Fellowship, so it allowed me to take time off. It allowed me to compensate my family so that they had childcare and they could really dive into their perspective. I just want to share 3 definitions that I want to start with the end so that you could see how powerful.
I'll just let you know, Tracy, we've got just over 2 minutes before we have to go to break.
Okay.
So if you don't get all the way through this, we'll just come back to it right after.
Great. I just want to give these 3 definitions. The families, as we did individual interviews and focus groups at 3 different locations at Boys and Girls Club across St. Paul and Minneapolis, 3 definitions of political education. At one location, political education is to attain knowledge and awareness in school so you're not on the outside looking in. The second group said political education is understanding how money and the school system work against working class achieving families. And the last location said political education is educating each other about how the system hinders us throughout the United States from achieving and being successful in schools. So I'll stop there.
That's really interesting. Yeah,
There's
okay,
a lot
that's a
there.
good place to take our break, and then we'll come back to all of these perspectives right after the break. Once again, we're talking about new perspectives and promising approaches to parent involvement in K-12 education, changes that we hope will lead to a better overall student experience and a narrowing achievement gap. And this is the 10th of our Truth to Tell Community Connections series, brought to you by Civic Media Minnesota, St. Paul Neighborhood Network, and KFAI Fresh Air Radio, with generous funding from the Bush Foundation.
And we're speaking with Victoria Balco, former chair of the Neighborhoods Organizing for Change Education Committee, with Zuki Ellis and Rebecca Wade from the Parent Teacher Home Visit Program, supported by the St. Paul Federation of Teachers, with Kristen Talbert, who is a participant in the Absent Narratives Project, sponsored by the Minnesota Humanities Commission, and is currently working with Da Young Center for Native Youth, and with Tracine Asbury, Minneapolis School Board member, and much more.
And we're going to take our 2-minute break here, but stick around. We'll be right back here on Truth to Tell Community Connections.
You are watching Truth to Tell's Community Connections series.
And we're we're back on Truth to Tell, Community Connections. I'm Michelle Alimoradi.
And I'm Tom O'Connell. Welcome back to our discussion on parent and community engagement in our public schools. Tracine, we kind of interrupted with our break. Do you want to continue?
Oh, sure. I think that the definitions of political education just really shows I guess that there is no glass ceiling on parent involvement in areas where people somehow thought that it was just about conversations and discussions and dispensing information. When families recognize the power that they have in school, the money that their child brings to the school, it gives them power, political power to be engaged. I know that one of the questions was about levels of, or maybe perspectives. I really think that there are different levels of parent involvement or parent engagement that we should really define, because sometimes people call things parent engagement and it's really not engagement by my definition, which I think that we really have to be clear. I think there's sometimes that there's just dispensing information, as Victoria shared. There's times where there's just conversations where people get a chance to voice their opinions. And then there are times that there's a collective approach where you're actually working with people, you're moving toward the same goal. So there's some type of movement or some end in mind. And then there's also activism. Looking at the legislature, looking at policy. And I think that it's important to make sure that distinction is very clear and that we recognize what opportunities are afforded to certain families and what opportunities are afforded to others. Because when you really want to change the system, you cannot just have conversations. If you want to change the system, you have to actually approach the system, and that's with legislation, that's with policy. And that's where, with my research, that I was really moving families to see that they can get involved and that the system itself is designed for the people, but sometimes we forget that. And so to be reminded of that, to have the information, the training, and then the parents had the passion to advocate for their children, they just needed some direction.
And on that note, we have this lovely wheel here, and we'll get a visual up for our audience at home as well. But this is a wheel of parent engagement. We actually have the person who created this wheel in the audience with us. So maybe we'll bring her into the conversation when we get...
Why don't we do that right now? Kate Toole is here, and I found out about her through friends, but also when reading something you had written, I found out that you had an experience of starting out well-meaning as someone who wanted to be involved with parent engagement, and soon discovered that, in fact, similar to what Tracine was saying, the schools are working better for some people than others. You want to kind of share your experience?
Absolutely. And I put together this wheel, and you know, you can get spun out on a hamster wheel, if you will, with some of this work. But there are people who can't even get on the wheel. People who don't even feel comfortable. They don't feel that they are empowered enough to be experts on their children's lives, and yet they are. They're the most important teacher in their children's lives. As a white parent getting involved in a school that's 3/4 parents of color, if you will, I served on the District Parent Advisory Council. I would attend meetings and see that it was majority white. And I thought, speaking of absent narratives, there's something wrong with this picture. Mm-hmm. So I took it upon myself to actively recruit and retain and support peers of color. And as I did that and got people to the table, I noticed that people who were very vocal with me outside of the group were very quiet once we got there. There was something wrong with that. I have a friend, Giovanni Ford, who works at an organization called NCAD, Network for the Development of Children of African Descent. A lot of people shaking heads, they know Giovanni. And he runs a parent power meeting called NIA, which is one of the Kwanzaa principles for purpose. And he would have these sessions where he would engage African American parents, parents of African descent, to talk about education. And so I, just being his friend, invited some of the parents that I had recruited and said, let's go over to talk with Giovanni. And you know, I was the only white person in that group, which was an honor, really, to be able to hear these different perspectives. But the parents who were silent in the majority white group began to really open up and talk about their experiences in very profound and meaningful ways. And it was an eye-opener for me, because they were really sharing with all of us some of the experiences that they go through. But then we would come back together to the larger group, and because there was that work in a cultural center, in an affinity group, if you will, where parents were encouraged to embrace their cultural identity, then they would come back with me to DPAC, the District Parent Advisory Council, and the discussion was much richer.
Great.
And so let's just talk about this. I mean, this wheel that you've got here, there's different levels of parent engagement. You've got, you know, anything from moving into a leadership position at the school to becoming an education professional or lobbyist. So there's quite a difference here. Can you tell us a little bit about the levels that are represented on this visual here?
Well, I think that there's many ways that parents can contribute. I know a woman in Connecticut named Elaine Zimmerman, and she's got an excellent program that she's created there in Connecticut. But one of the things that they realize there is that parents can be civic leaders and really, really inform the school process. Parents can sometimes be like an inoculation. They can have the precise answers to heal the system, but it's painful to listen to them, because they see what's going on and they experience it very profoundly. We do, I should say we, because I'm a parent, right. and I've been a Minneapolis public school parent for 18 years, and I've been around the block, and you go through a lot.
Well, it seems like underneath the wheel, all these different ways of being involved, and you also name some of them, is a reality that unless we really make an effort, the school is the kind of default position, culturally speaking, as is middle class European American institutions. And until, in all the different ways, and everyone on this panel in some way has directly challenged that, what's on this wheel doesn't really work. But once you begin to get underneath that, it starts to happen. And one of the things I want to start going back, and then I'll get back to the audience, it seems like everybody here, in one way or another, has been involved with showing that parents, low-income parents, parents of color, want to and will be involved if they're approached, and if there's leadership shown, and if there's an openness on the other side to that actual engagement. That's what the home visit program is about. That's what Kristen's work is about. Community organizing is all about that. So you found that, in fact, parents are very eager. Parents from the north side, and they have really strong opinions if they're engaged, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you real briefly, you went door to door, you and a number of organizations, it's just not on the north side, knocked on doors and asked a bunch of questions in a survey. What did you find? What were some of the takeaways from that?
Some of the takeaways would be that parents were concerned about discipline and safety for their kids. So kids being bullied at school, safety with other children, but also that especially the discipline rate for African American and other children of color were much higher, and suspension rates and that kind of stuff were much higher than non-children of color, and that was a big issue for parents, and it should be. Also that parents didn't feel, again, that their voice was being valued and heard. That, again, you go to conferences or you go be invited to community meetings and the school, different activities, but it's at that level of engagement, it's not any more deeper to where they really are involved in decision-making for their children, where they really can bring their piece into what's happening with their kids, and things are being told to them as opposed to they're being part of the process and design, and that parents really want to be part of what's really happening and not just kind of blanketed with things. And I guess, again, like I said before, was communication piece, was that parents wanted more communication and felt there wasn't a lack of communication. And how do we break that communication barrier down? So those were kind of the main things that were found. And we did that with the door knocking, the surveys, but we also had community meetings that we invited more people to. So we ended up having like 700 people doing the surveys and having all these discussions to kind of go deeper with that. And that's when we had the teachers and the community members, parents, all kind of people together discussing these issues. But kind of the same common themes came up.
Right. And one of the things I read the report over was that there was a lot of parents who felt good about their teachers.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that
People
the
liked their teachers. They weren't knocking
yeah.
the teachers. They liked
Yeah.
their teachers.
Yeah.
That was the thing. They're not knocking anybody. It's how can we make this better for our kids?
Right, right. And so with the home visit program, I'm wondering, and this may or may not be something that has come out, this whole question here about discipline and different kids getting disciplined differently, is that something that kind of comes out or and is, in the conversations, or do you see that the relationships that get developed in these kind of conversations can help with that kind of issue?
It does come out sometimes in the actual visits when we're in the homes. One of the things we ask our families is, what was your experience like maybe as a third grader or a fifth grader in high school, or what is one thing, an expectation that you have of me as the teacher? And so a lot of times is that communication piece, to call me or let me know what's going on, not just when there's a behavior problem, right? But if there's, when my child's doing what they're supposed to, when they're meeting those expectations, don't just call. I don't want to hear from you only when there's problems. And so sometimes that does come out. I'm a special education teacher as well in the St. Paul public school system. And so that discipline suspension rate, a lot of that comes down to, subjective, and it comes down to the culture and how do I enter the building as a white female teacher every day when I work in a building that is 70% students of color. And so do I enter with the right, frame of mind and thinking about what can I do that's culturally relevant to meet all the students' needs in the building. And so a lot of it is reflective. I have to be reflective as how do I interact with kids every day? What is my story? What is their story? How can we get on the same page to really do the education piece, because that's what we're in school for, right? We don't want to send kids home. They're not learning when they're at home. That's not where they're getting their education. And so that's not what we should be doing.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's Rebecca Wade for our radio listeners. So now we want to open it up to everyone in the audience to comments and questions, and we'll just kind of make it a conversation. So anyone can just pop in, and Kel will be walking around with the microphone. Do we have any comments from you guys out there? Any questions? Okay.
Hi there, I'm Michael Dietrich. I'm with Minnesota 2020.
Okay.
And a lot of the work that I do is focused more at the statewide policy level. And family engagement is something that is intensely personal and very local when it's being done right. But it's also something where we have a lot of people who are interested in figuring out how you can scale it up when it's working well, or finding ways to make the system less hostile to the kinds of productive engagement that have been talked about here today. So I was wondering if we could get some views from the panel on what the state could be doing and what the state should absolutely not be doing to open the doors to better system-level family engagement, and how families can be involved in the process of making that happen.
Who would like to start us off on that? Thank you, Michael.
Anybody want to tackle that?
I'll get us started.
Tracine?
When you talked about what's working, how do we find out what's working and scale it up? That is the key. Looking at the best practices. I know that a question was asked earlier about looking at the data and collecting data, and that's the way that we actually can get better, is to make sure that we're paying attention with what's working, and we're looking at the actual components. We're looking at the location, we're looking at socioeconomic status, we're looking at the years of experience of the people implementing the program, the people that it's working for, so that when we see what's working best over a period of time, then we can replicate it, then we can scale it up. And it doesn't mean replicate is not the same as duplicate, which is oftentimes people mistake those terms. But I think that's a way to get started. One thing that we're doing, for example, at Minneapolis Public Schools, we just passed last night the behavior standards policy, and that was with the engagement of our communities and the engagement of not just our communities over north, but our communities throughout the district, and for over quite a bit of time. And what that showed is that when the community is engaged, when the school system is engaged, and then we can actually make sure that it's embedded in policy, and then we actually don't just let that be the end, but we have the implementation. We make sure that it's, because we have not done a very good job in the past, we make sure that we have a close monitoring, evaluation of the implementation to make sure that we're looking at outcomes. We're looking at the quantitative data as well as the qualitative. So I think the state would benefit from partnering with school districts to find out what schools are working well for which students.
Did anybody else want to respond to that?
I will. The other thing that I think is critical and crucial is that the building of relationships. And so however that might look in a particular school or a particular district, and it doesn't need to look the same everywhere, right? But as a teacher or as an administrator or as a paraprofessional or as a nutrition service person, if students have a relationship with you, it changes. And if families have a relationship with you, so there are places across the country for the Home Visit Project where nutrition service people and custodians and bus drivers have gone through the training. So those people also go on home visits, right? And so if you take a school bus, that's another, as a student, that's another relationship you're building. So you have a trusted person to go to in the building if there's a concern, if there's an issue. So I think that critical piece is building those relationships. Our families send their best and brightest stars to us every single day, and they might look different in how they come to us, but they are sending us their best. They're not telling their child to come to school and act up or make the teacher mad. Or they are sending us their best. And so however you build those relationships, when you are truly a partnership and co-teachers, the families and the teachers are the co-teachers of that child, that's where you're going to see a difference. That's where you're going to see a difference in the outcome of what our students are learning.
And directly responding to the part about the state, in your opinion, having done this for a while now, do you see a role for the state in any part of what you do?
Well, we're just kind of getting that leg going on the training around the state for the parent-teacher home visit. So we're just starting on that. However, again, not just the state, but nationally, I facilitate a class called School Family Community that's through American Federation of Teachers. And so that is all about effective communication and building partnerships with families. And how do you do that meaningful partnership? We have to all be on that. We have to be there. Somebody had talked about the triangle, right? The community, the family, the school. We can't do it without all three of those people and organizations at the table. They all need to be there. We need to educate our kids together.
So one area, did you want to say something?
Just something really.
I felt a nudge.
Oh, it was a love tap. I just wanted to say real quickly, one of the things that Minneapolis Public Schools did was to invite our our Senate and House of Representative elected officials to the school district, and we actually talked about our legislative agenda. We actually heard from them ways that we can disseminate information so that when they are representing us amongst the rest of the state, that they have a really firsthand view of what Minneapolis needs. And then we have we have amazing lobbyists, but we have a legislative agenda, and we actually let everyone know this is what we're doing at Minneapolis Public Schools. This is what we need from our elected officials at the Capitol. So I think that informing, building relationships, as it was mentioned, but actually building relationships to have something accomplished at the state level, not just letting them know this is what's happening, but to say this is what we need, and not just the funding, but the bills that we need them to advocate for and to stay strong on. And when they know our students and they know our teachers and staff, they do that.
So you're advocating for reform from the ground up, not saying that the legislators should be the ones thinking about the changes that need to be made, but the other way around.
Well,
they should just be listening?
I guess I would even say it's more of a collective approach. It's making, I know we have terms like reform and things like that. What I'm asking for is for a high-performing school system, a high-performing state, and whatever we need to do that. So that means that we need to change the way we're doing things. So whatever you want to call it, go for it. But we all have to be engaged, and it has to be collective, not necessarily collaborative, but collective, moving the same pace, moving towards the same goal.
Thank you, Tracine. I think we have another question. Can you introduce yourself?
Isaac Goodall, and for the parent-teacher home visit, I was just wondering, are there any incentives for teachers to be a part of it?
Rebecca Rizuki?
We actually negotiated in our contract language last round of negotiations to have a stipend paid to teachers, which is actually one of the non-negotiables of the national project, which was created by parents, and they sort of demanded that teachers be compensated for their time, showing that the value of what we do, and we're taking time, away from our families as teachers, and so that's one of the non-negotiables, is that teachers are compensated for their time. We're the first union, I believe, in the country that actually negotiated language into our contract for that stipend. A lot of the other places get it out of Title I funds or compensatory funds or building funds or grants or all kinds of places. But without that, you need to make sure that the funding is sustainable and that it can continue, because places where that funding hasn't been constant, the project has not been as successful and has fallen apart.
And now, are there any benefits to the school as a whole for implementing this program? Or is it just...
Yeah, their families love coming into the building, and their students are excited. But
as far as incentives from the state, like, do they get any extra funding for bringing in this type of program at this point?
No, there's no funding.
Do you see...
So
is that something you would be wanting to work toward in the future? Because I'm just thinking in terms of how schools are now evaluated by the way that students do on tests a lot of times. Would you see in the future any sort of shift to where schools are evaluated by how much they engage with families?
I don't think I would want that there, but I mean, personally. But I think, talk about how teachers and schools are evaluated by student achievement, right? Or how the students are achieving, scoring on standardized testing. So imagine you have this great relationship with the family, and the students want to come to school and they want to learn for you because they know your teacher and family, grandma, parent, whoever is on board together, and so they don't want to disappoint anyone, and they're excited about what you're doing. We're bringing absent narrative work into the classrooms, and we're doing, so the benefits are really endless as far as just that piece right there without...
And maybe that's a tension when we think about, the state and policies, because so much of the debate's about outcomes and achievement and funding and teachers, contracts. When what we're all talking about is relationships, right? We're talking about turning around the basic nature of the relationship between parents and communities, and also changing the narrative. And one of the narratives, I think, is this narrative that certain parents don't really want to be involved, and I think we're hearing that, in fact, that's different. Now, we've been referring to absent narratives, so I want to call on Amanda Norman, who was she's right.
Oh, we have another question.
Then,
I'm
I'm sorry. I didn't
This
mean
is
to
just quickly-
preempt a question. Okay, go ahead.
And it follows actually along the same line. As it seems like we as
This is
human
Tracy
beings...
Beckman.
Tracy Beckman. We respond to economic incentives. It's just business does, everyone seems to. What about the per pupil unit funding, if it had some sort of incentive for parents to get involved? It just seems like parental involvement is so critical that without it, there's a huge loss economically and socially. So anybody know of anything that we have $1.2 billion surplus, I understand, maybe some economic incentive for parental involvement?
There's a policy idea for 2020 to take a look at.
Shall we ask our school board member?
Well,
Tracine?
Well, thank you for asking. However, I do not know. I have to say, if there is some type of incentive, I know that one of the things I guess when I think about achievement, and we do talk about, incentives to being engaged, but I think one of the things that we forget is that education is not strictly about the money part of it, and that's how we sell it. You can make more money, if you have a high school diploma, college. We understand that. But also education is about transforming your world, right? It's about participating fully in the world, not just having a job, making ends meet, but it means actively participating in the system. I love relationships. I understand testing. I know that we need to have a comprehensive approach to our students, which we do great when they're little kids like my 2-year-old. But as they get older, we forget about the comprehensive approach, and it's just about testing. But I think that one of the things we have to realize is that we do this in some areas of our city where we talk about critical thinking, we talk about problem solving, we talk about inquiry, and then other places we talk about money. We talk about how much money you can make with a diploma and things like that. So that doesn't answer your question, Tracy, but I just want to get at that sometimes the incentive is impacting the system. Sometimes the incentive is, and it's not to say we don't want people to make enough to live, to thrive. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that we have to recognize that when we deal with money and incentives, we do have to question the fact, why is it that education, which is the determining factor, is not as appealing, or why aren't people running to the schoolhouse, right? There's a reason for that, because it's not the same for everyone. Right? So I think that we have to look at the system instead of finding all these like Band-Aid approach. We have to look at how the system was designed. Sorry if I took too long.
No, it's okay. We have about 2 minutes, Amanda. If you do want to talk about absent narratives, we can give you a brief chance to introduce that.
Share some thoughts, Amanda and Norman.
Sure. My name's Amanda Norman. I was the project coordinator for a collaborative effort of Northwest Suburban Integrated School District, the Minnesota Humanities Center and SPNN here. And what we did was we created sort of a documentary of sorts that was entitled Increasing Parent Engagement Through Absent Narratives, which was thanks to Kristen. She was one of those voices on the film. But nonetheless, we talk about sort of what are the hopes and dreams of these parents that are involved in the film, and how do they parent? What do they believe education involves, and what does that mean to them? What does that look like? And what ought it be in sort of those formal environments?
And as we close out, how can people who are watching us, listening to us, or here see that?
You can go to, there's at spnn.com, there's, or
I think it's spnn.org.
.org, excuse me. You can look it up there. You can see it on YouTube as well.
Great.
So thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. We are coming to the end of our hour, unfortunately. We always have way too much to talk about to squeeze into one little tiny hour. But we'll go ahead and sign off here. And thanks to all of our guests. So thank you to Victoria Belko. She's the former chair of the Neighborhoods Organizing for Change Education Committee. Thank you for joining us today and letting us know about your the survey results, because those were actually quite compelling. And then we also had with us Zuki Ellis and Rebecca Wade of the Parent-Teacher Home Visit Team from the St. Paul Federation of Teachers, doing great work in homes there. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming, and also thank you to Kristen Talbert, who was part of the Absent Narratives Project and works with Native issues, and to Tracine Asbury, school board member, parent advocate. And thanks to all of you for coming.
Yeah, a big thanks to our audience tonight and for being here and participating. And we want to remind you that Truth to Tell Community Connections is a co-production of Civic Media Minnesota and St. Paul Neighborhood Network and KFAI Fresh Air Radio. And links to audio and video archives of this and all of our past shows are up on Truth to Tell's own website, truthtotell.org. truthtoTell.org.
And now we're talking fast. Thanks to David Zierat and Spin Crew for their work capturing this on video. And thanks to Peter Hansen, Kel Heil, Mark Kerner for the production assistance as well.
And join us every Monday morning at 9 a.m. on KFAI for our regular Truth to Tell program. You can catch the replay of this in our Monday morning slot. And until next time, I'm Michelle Alimoradi.
And I'm Tom O'Connell, literally sitting in for our normal host, Andy Driscoll. And we'll see you soon. And remember, please do take care of each other.